Welcome to Rough Drafts, How God Writes His Love in Our Stories, a podcast that explores the faith journeys of our friends and neighbors in Burns, Tennessee. Everyone has a story to tell, and in this podcast, we'll hear powerful and inspiring stories of how God works in the ordinary lives of people like you and me. Our stories are unfinished and perfectly imperfect. They are just rough drafts, a glimpse of what is to come because God is still at work, writing plot twists, introducing new characters, and bringing good even from the most challenging circumstances. Join us as we see what God is up to in our stories. Here's your host, Matthew Hyatt.
Friends, thanks for joining us for today's Rough Draft episode. I think you're going to enjoy today's guest. He is a member of an exclusive sad club, people who have survived being youth ministry interns at Burns Church of Christ. He's serving in Florida now. He came to us from Hickman County. It's my friend Griffin Elkins. Griffin, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matthew. It's been a pleasure and quite a few years of struggle just trying to get over the trauma of having to be one of your interns.
Yeah, there's a meeting for that. It's like Tuesday nights after AA, I think.
I might need it, you know.
I was trying to remember who all is in this kind of sad club. It's you and Brendan and William Welch, Tyler Quinn, Dagan Hall. I'm forgetting somebody. Man, it's been a fun run over the years doing the intern thing.
I tell people all the time that, and this is genuine. I'm not saying this just because you had me on your podcast, but I tell people all the time that I would not be able to hold a position of youth ministry if I hadn't had that internship. What I learned there and the ways I grew there truly made me, I don't think you're ever truly ready to just hop in, but it made me so much more ready than I could have been. And for that, I am thankful and forever grateful to the Burns Church of Christ.
Man, you're stepping in it thick over here. You know, because what I remember from our internship was at least once a week you looked at me and said, "How do you still have a job?" So,
hey, you're still going strong, so it couldn't be that crazy.
Well, that's fair enough. Well, man, so you're in Florida. Tell us, what's your God story? What do you want to share with us?
Well, I think we could start. My initial God story is not one of extreme variety or of extreme excitement. But I was talking to my girlfriend about that. I was like, I don't know what to say when I'm doing this. She said, just tell it how it is. And every God story doesn't have to be some spectacular moment, some overly exciting, just crazy, wow story. Because people also need to hear that it doesn't have to be that way. Because people will feel like they're missing something. Well, God hasn't had this moment with me, and we can lose people that way. But to tell you my God story, I think we have to start at the beginning. Being from Hickman County, it should be no secret that I grew up in a God-loving home. I could probably count on my hands and toes the amount of Sundays and Wednesdays I missed combined growing up. We were there every time the doors were open, and I'm so thankful for that. I grew up in a home led by a great father and a wonderful mother who loved the Lord and raised me and my two siblings to also love the Lord. So much so that by the time I got into the youth group in 6th grade, after a couple months of being there, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life, and that was to do youth ministry. Because even just in that short time of initially being in there, it was having such a profound effect on my life that I wanted to be able to spread that to the next generation of youth, and hopefully the generation after that, and so on. But I grew up in a home that loved the Lord, and I didn't have to necessarily come find the Lord myself. I have done that, but the Lord was presented to me very early, almost immediately out of the womb, you know. And so I've always had this drive, this passion to be there, to serve, to work. And that's not tooting my own horn. That's tooting my parents and my family and my grandparents who have all led in positions at the church. My father was an elder. My grandfathers both served in leadership roles. It was truly a wonderful experience. Now, that's not to say that I haven't struggled, that I haven't not fallen away, but haven't had moments of hardship and trial that have made me question things. As most people will tell you, I would at least assume, if you get an honesty serum out of them, that they have. And for me, that's all been mainly self-inflicted. While I was talking or thinking about what I wanted to say today, the old George Jones song Choices kept coming into my mind, where he says, I've had choices since the day that I was born. There were voices that told me right from wrong. If I had listened, well, I wouldn't be here today, living and dying by the choices I've made. And that applies to all aspects of everybody's life. But I think about that when I think about my life and where the Lord has brought me. And that's kind of the overarching theme that I kind of want to look at today is even out of bad choices, mistakes, consequences that come from those, the Lord finds ways to work and work well and good as He is. If there were times when sometimes I think if I could go back and change these things, and then I think about them, I realize that, well, I wouldn't be here doing what I love if some things had gone differently in my life.
Yeah.
And through that, I can see how the Lord has worked through not only me, but those around me, and the mistakes, the struggle, and oftentimes the sin that has snuck its way into my life. But good has come out of that, because the Lord's will is going to get done. The Lord's plan is going to get done. But we have to be the ones that are willing to accept it. And I've got a kind of a funny story about that that I can tell here in a moment. But I want to look at the way that God uses every choice we make, whether right or wrong, good or bad, to make us who we are, bring us to the point that we are. I think about David, and in a time of his life where he could not have done anything worse than the choices he was making. He saw Bathsheba. He brought her to him. He slept with her. He got her pregnant. He killed her husband, who was one of his trusted advisors, good friends, and mighty men. The baby died. And what does he do? He gets up and he writes, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." And I see bad choices being used not to glorify God, but to see good come out of it at the end. We see where God is holding His goodness in our lives, even when we kind of lose track of it, when we stumble and our free will gets in the way of ourselves from getting to God. We see God not come back to us because He's always there waiting for us, but we see God's love come back into our lives when we're willing to just accept it there. I think I rambled a little too much.
No, you're good. But I mean, there's just so many stories like this. In our Wednesday study at Burns, we were in Judges 14, I guess, with Samson's story. And at the beginning of that story, Samson, kind of this miraculous birth thing. He's going to be a Nazirite, no haircuts, no liquor, no dead things. It's a weird start to the story. But then in Judges 14, he says, "I want to go marry this Philistine chick." And mom and dad say this is a terrible idea. They resist him, but he won't listen. And there was this line in Judges 14:4. I wrote it down yesterday. His father and mother did not realize this was the Lord's doing. It was Samson making a decision that would lead to his own death. But this was a God thing because God was using this moment to save His people. And it's just really cool to hear stories of a God who is capable of using the dumbest things we do to accomplish his will.
Absolutely. And there, like you said, there's no shortage of those stories throughout Scripture. There's no shortage of those stories throughout your podcast. There's no shortage of those stories throughout just day-to-day talking to people. And oftentimes I would say, they don't realize that these little coincidences that have shown good from bad are God things.
Yeah.
And I think that is sad and a loss on the part of man to not see that and see the glory and the goodness that comes from that.
Totally.
Let me
Genesis 50, Joseph and his brothers, he says, you meant this for evil, but God meant it for good. In the Gospels, you've got Pilate, who's just a spineless coward doing what the crowd wants, but that's how God accomplishes salvation. I mean, this is a drum we probably need to beat pretty loud and clear for people to hear.
Right. It's not saying, and people have a tendency to misconstrue God's will being done as us having no free will, but that's not the case. We see it in Moses, in Genesis, where Moses is getting ready for what will be the Exodus, in Exodus, where Moses is getting ready for the Exodus.
Minus
when he's at
points.
Yeah. when he's at the burning bush, he says, God, I can't do this. I can't talk. I can't do this. I don't want to publicly speak. You gotta pick somebody else. And God's like, I'm going to use you, but if you're not going to do it, somebody will. Like, it doesn't have to be you, but somebody's going to get this done. So what does he do? He calls up Aaron to do the speaking for Moses. Our free will is there, and God's will is there, but we have to make sure that our free will doesn't get in the way of God's will, even though God's will triumph 100% of the time.
Oh yeah, God's going to get what he wants. The Esther story, Mordecai says to Esther, God's going to save his people. The question is, are you going to be one of his people? Are you going to be one of the ones who's in on this or out of this?
Exactly.
God gets what he wants. So tell me how this has kind of played for you in these first couple of years of ministry down there in Florida. You grew up in Centerville. You did the Freed-Hardeman thing. You interned back home. You interned with us, and now you are 10,000 miles away from home in the state of alligators and old Yankees driving, doing your first ministry work there. What's this been like for you?
Well, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't set the stage of how I got down here.
Yeah.
So I'm at Freed-Hardeman. It's 2020. This is my senior year. I'm in a position of getting ready to graduate. I've got not a job lined up, but jobs I'm looking at. I've got a steady relationship. I've got all of this that seems to be going right. And then in March, what happens? We get a fun little, supposed to have been 1 week to flatten the curve that winds up being 2 years of lockdowns and masks and whatnot. And not to be political, but it's a fact. Those things happened. And let me tell you, that threw a wrench in my plans because not only did we got sent home from Freed 2 months early. My relationship, which I had banked way too much in, ended. My job that I had at the time put me on furlough, and it felt like there was nothing in this world that was going right. And truly, and I can say this with certainty and with complete honesty, that was the worst period of my life. And it was just all things. It was like the walls of Jericho had crashed down all at once.
It's a big deal when you don't get graduation like you expected. You didn't get the career transition, the relationship stuff. I mean, any one of those things might not seem like the worst thing, but when you start piling them together, man, I mean, it lands.
Yeah, and it landed hard, and so I'm spending a few months trying to finish school online. Classes were just miserable doing that. It was night and day what they were compared to actually being there with people. Church was closed. Work was no longer there. Um, you couldn't go uh, do anything with anyone. But the one thing I found that I could do and I could enjoy was fishing. So after a couple weeks worth of self wallowing and being pathetic as it was, I decided, you know what? I'm going to get out of the house. I'm going to go fishing. So every day for about, oh, it was probably a month or two, I went out and just sat at this little pond at the camp I grew up going to, fishing. And it wasn't a, I don't want to say a spiritual awakening, but it was a emotional, a spiritual, a mental, and honestly a physical oasis, a refreshing. Like I had crawled through the Sahara and found a body of water, cool, clean water, because it was nice just to sit outside and spend time alone, but not alone in quarantine, but alone with nature, with the sun, with the water, with God. And that is where things started to turn back right, at least in my mind. Not that things were fixed immediately in my life, but that I was back to where I believed there was hope, because that's what had happened. I had lost hope in everything. So fast forward a little bit, my job, which wasn't a career, just the way to make money and pay the bills at the time, brought me back on. They opened back up. The problem was that's not what I wanted to do. I did not want to work a retail job for my life. I wanted to do youth ministry. But the problem was that churches were either still shut down, were just opening back up, had been hit very hard financially because they weren't open. And so places were not looking necessarily for a job or for a youth minister. So about, I'd say about 6 more months rolled by. This is late December, maybe early January of 2021. And through all this time, I have a good friend. His name is Rich Beatty. He lives a couple hours south of me now, down in Stewart, where he is a youth minister. And we were good friends at Freed, and we would call and talk to each other about once a week or so. And every phone call would always just end with, "So when are you moving to Florida?" And every phone call would end with, "Rich, I'm not moving to Florida. I have no desire to move to Florida." And one day it was a rough day at work. I can't remember what nonsense had happened. The drive back was bad. Traffic was bad. Just everything piled up at once. But I was talking to Rich, and he ended the phone call as he always did. "So when are you moving to Florida?" And I said, "Rich, it is going to take an act of God to make me move to Florida." And 30 minutes later, I get a text message from a area code I've never seen, from a man I've never heard of, on behalf of a church that I didn't know existed, asking if I wanted to interview for their position of youth ministry in Holly Hill, Florida. And immediately,
sense of humor.
Yeah, if anybody ever says no, I tell them that story.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, well, I guess this is the game we're playing, isn't it? And I spent a few minutes just reflecting on the nonsense that I had caused, actively trying to shut a door that God was apparently trying to open for me, to the point where he's literally saying, "Here is this door. Are you going to take it or not?" And that was just beautiful for me. It's one of my favorite stories to tell, because now I'm in a place I never thought I'd be, working a job that I had only always wanted, doing what I love for a good church with good people, in a wonderful area, when I never had intentions of moving out of the state of Tennessee.
Yeah.
But here I am, 2.5 years later, almost going on 3, and I wouldn't have traded it for the world. I say all that to get into the ministry where things are going great. We've had a good 2 years since I've been here. Well, I would say it's been a good 2 years. You might have to ask some other people if they would also state that.
We'll check the references on that. That's okay.
But it's been an adjustment too, and this is something you can brag about, and I oftentimes do brag about, but something that I miss dearly, but has in ways been a blessing too. Florida is not the Bible Belt.
Yes.
In fact, I was talking to our preacher the other night about this. This is not a land of build it and they will come for youth ministries as it is back home, where you just slap something on the calendar and 30 kids show up just because you said it was going to happen. It is, in a lot of ways, the world has changed this a little bit. Sundays and Wednesdays are not sacred for sports anymore.
No.
And things like that are getting in the way of youth ministry. But it has been an experience and an adjustment, but it has been a blessing to try and figure out how to navigate that, where it's just different. It's a culture. Not that these kids don't care about God or prioritize God, but
it's not automatic like it was in a town like Center.
Right. Yeah, automatic is the exact word I would use. It's not automatic. It's you have to almost campaign like a politician.
Yeah, you got to get out there and meet people, and it's funny in the time that I've preached. The societal shift around religion is just so clear. If I meet an 80-year-old and they say, "What do you do?" and I say, "Well, I'm a minister," there is a sense of respect that I get automatically, even deference, sometimes an unhealthy deference. But like there is you're a man of God, you're a man of the cloth. Like there's that sort of thing, which is still weird to me. But if I meet a 20-something and I say I'm a minister, I'm immediately met with suspicion, distrust, and distance.
Right.
I really wish I lived in a world where it was just, oh, okay, so that's what you do. I don't particularly want to be put on a pedestal, and I don't want to particularly be put in a pit, but that change has happened quick.
Yeah, and it I don't know exactly where to point for it, but it's been clear even before I was in the ministry. I could see it changing, and that's also saying something, seeing as I come from 30 minutes from where you were from, in the heart of the Bible Belt, truly, that if that issue is there, how is it elsewhere?
Yes. What's it like in New York?
Exactly.
And I don't think people fully appreciate the Bible Belt distinction that you're making too. On one hand, it's kind of cool that in Dixon County you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a church. So there's some advantages to that. There is a church culture here. Everyone knows something about a church. I mean, if they don't, it's because they haven't wanted to. They have wanted not to. But there also comes with that some real disadvantages. There's some weird competition. There's some weird infighting, competition for resources, rivalries. This church doesn't like this church. And in places that aren't so thick with churches, it seems like sometimes there's a little bit more of, no, we're not going to divide and split and fuss and fight over that. We don't have time to make enemies,
Well, and there's also some disadvantages for just the common man and woman's faith.
Yeah.
You and I often talked when I was the intern there about not handing faith to youth, but having them build their own. But when you live in an area where, especially like in my situation growing up, where it is nigh impossible to have faith handed to you, finding your own tools to build those foundational blocks can be a lot more difficult. Whereas down here, some of the people I have met are some of the most on fire for Christ and for God and for the church people I have ever met, because they had to find their way to God, not have God brought to them, which, like you said, the Bible Belt has advantages, but it has disadvantages. You're always going to find strength in having to work for something, more so than you're going to find it being handed something. And that's kind of how I wanted to build a ministry, was to give tools to build foundational blocks, not hand them their blocks or my blocks or their parents' blocks, if that makes sense. But that has been kind of how down here has been, like I said, it's a culture shock almost, the differences. Growing up in a place where if the doors were open, the bulk of the congregation was there. If there was something written on the youth calendar, you didn't have to mention it once. The youth group was there. And then moving to a place where you got to remind people, and you got to advertise for things, and you got to really push. And I've had to go drag kids out of their houses before to get them to think.
Okay, that's kidnapping. We don't do that, Griffin. And you can't drive a van around a neighborhood and offer them free candy to get any. We talked about this in the internship. Not again.
Well, like I said, there were some things I've already forgotten from your advice you've given me.
Or does this go back to the mistakes we've made section?
Well, that might be that part.
The charges never stuck, man.
That's right.
So what has surprised you about ministry work? What's been different? Because, it is different to do a summer of youth ministry as an intern than it is to go to a place and church is your job 24/7. Tell me what that transition's been like.
The transition itself, I don't think was necessarily the worst part. Like I said, the internship I had at Burns helped a lot with opening my eyes to more of what it would be like. Because yes, Andy was there and you were there, but for the summer, it was the keys had been handed to me for a good bulk of it, which I'm so thankful for. Like I said, I would have been nowhere near qualified or capable of running a ministry if I had not had that opportunity. But the thing that has kind of surprised me most, that I don't know how nobody ever brought this up, but this thing that happens, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, where some weeks you'll have 12 hours worth of work to get done. But then there are weeks where you are going nonstop, day in and day out, and it is exhausting, one thing after another. I'm not talking about just going to camp or doing a retreat or something like that, but just things going on within the church and things going on within the group that just never seems to end. That has kind of caught me off guard because I was used to a retail job where it was, here's your 35 hours a week, here is your shift, here is what you got to get done for the day. And here it's kind of, well, this is what we got going on. Let's go get this done now.
Yeah.
This just came up. We need to head over to the hospital. This just came up. Let's go help out here, kind of deal.
People are really inconsiderate and die at terribly inopportune times too. They want their funeral.
I know. If people would just plan better for life emergencies, this would be the easiest job in the world.
One thing I think catches people off guard too is maybe more than most, there's a weird blurring between your personal and professional life. So, like if I go have lunch with Brendan, the youth minister, was that work or was that me having lunch with a friend? Because he's a friend of mine, but he's also my coworker. Which is it? If I go to the house so that no one will bother me so that I can read a book of the Bible? Was that my personal devotional time, or was that sermon prep? And there's so many other
Right.
things that we do that the answer is kind of both. You've got a lot of time that ends up being sort of blurry. So there's part of you that's like, have I done enough? There's part of you that says, have I done too much? And trying to achieve that balance, that's a tricky thing.
It's, and I was told that coming in, or not necessarily coming in, but at my time studying at Frida Hardman. So I was expecting that, but I wasn't ready for it. And, you have kind of a line that blurs, and your own personal trying to figure out what's personal and what's work. But then you also have, and we won't get into too much about this, but you also have the outside perception that gets looked in of other people asking those same questions too. And just, it's almost also every decision you make is under a microscope, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It has, I think it holds people hopefully accountable more. But it's a job where there are no secrets when it comes to you, which can be taxing and tiring, but it's also not the end of the world. It is what it is. It's a thorn in the side that is worth enduring for the greater good, for the work. I wouldn't trade this for the world.
So what do you love about it? What makes it so special to you?
I got to think of how to word this properly to where it sounds good when people are listening.
The paycheck? No.
Yeah, exactly. It gives me purpose, drive, hope, even seeing the next generation youth and teens and on top of that children being excited for God, for Jesus, and for church, and just knowing him and their spiritual lives growing is such a beautiful thing. And it just gives me drive to I don't know exactly how I'm trying to word this. Like I said at the beginning, when I was in the youth group growing up, it was all that mattered in my head. I had to be at every single event that was available. I remember one of the worst evenings of my high school life. I had the flu on Super Bowl Sunday and couldn't go to the Super Bowl party, and you would have thought the world was going to end in my head. But the impact that had, and people like Craig Shelton, who was my youth minister, and Chris Webb, who was my youth minister before that, and mentors to me like the current youth minister there, Carter, and you, and the impact that had on my life and my spiritual well-being, and giving me the focus of where I needed to be, even though so many times I fell short.
Yeah.
That importance in my life, if I could help present that to even just one teenager in a sliver of what it meant to me, it would all be worth it.
Yeah.
Because without the youth, the teens, without the children in our churches being committed, being faithful, being on fire, there's no future for the church.
Right.
So without that, there's almost no reason to go on.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps me going. Just seeing the love for God in the eyes of kids and teens and students gives me the breath of life, truly.
It is really cool because, you get a front row seat to some of life's best moments. It is not that uncommon for me to have a week where I perform a wedding and a funeral in the same week, or, I'm the third person to hold a new baby and I go to a funeral service, or, you get to teach a Bible study where the light goes off and they get grace, or you help somebody get connected to a rehab facility and it might be the domino that keeps them from dying. What's cool about this work is you really get to do some stuff that matters. And what I think people who've never done it don't get, what's hard about the job isn't so much that you have a lot of hours or weird expectations. It's the amount of times that people on the sidelines, I got to say this right.
I avoided this earlier.
Yeah, I heard you do it, but I thought we needed to drive into it. The times that people on the sidelines micromanage or nitpick or fuss and fight or argue about minutia that doesn't matter, or actively make it harder for other people to follow Jesus. That's the stuff that'll drive you to want to drink. I mean, when you're having a moment where you study with somebody and they're saying, I think that Jesus is Lord and I want to follow him and I want to give him my life. And then the next person who calls you is somebody who says, well, the thermostat was 2 degrees too cold on Sunday, and if you don't fix that, I'm leaving this church. You just kind of want to throat punch the second person, because you're missing the point. That's what I think gets hard about this. But man, it's sure cool when it works, isn't it?
It is one of the best feelings in the world, watching that light bulb click, or just seeing passion where there wasn't before, or just seeing passion rekindled, even. Coming home from a good retreat, coming home from just a good Bible study. There is an air of calmness, of comfort, of joy that comes out of those. And it is a wonderful feeling. And I'm not in this career, and as you're not in this career, for personal gratification, for the thank yous. We're sure not in it for the paycheck.
Yeah.
But we're in it to bring people to Christ. We're in it to grow the kingdom of God. And each single opportunity that gets to come to fruition, like it's said oftentimes, the angels rejoice over just one soul who has been saved. We rejoice over even just one soul who has had a light bulb click.
Yeah.
Or someone who has decided to come back, someone who has said they want to spend their Sundays with us, is a great feeling, because it feels like we're making a difference.
Yeah. Man, just, making a difference. That's what we want to do. There's enough stuff in the world that's broken. I can't fix politics. I can't fix terrorism. I can't fix the economy. Neither can any of you, by the way.
Sure.
But if I can help someone love and be loved, that's enough.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, Griffin, man, you got anything else you want to share? Like warnings to people never to intern with me, or warnings not to do ministry, go sell insurance? What are you thinking?
I wouldn't say any warnings. What I would say is, if this is what you feel like you were called to do it. And in knowing that, know that there is a deceiver who is going to try to pull you away from that. Even when you are sure this is where you want to spend your career, your life, your every waking moment, there will be doubt that gets thrown your way to kind of slither in. And don't let that win, because Satan knows that you will make a difference.
Yeah.
And he wants to do everything he can to keep you from making that difference. It is a hard job. It is a taxing job, but it is a great job. It is rewarding and joyful, even in its worst moments.
There you go, man. There's your commercial for ministry. So if you want a job in ministry, call Griffin. He'll get you hooked up.
Don't call me, call Matthew.
Yeah, right. I didn't do anything to help you get that job. They hired you despite the letter I wrote them.
They did say I had a bad letter.
You didn't let me give you a reference. I don't understand why. Man, you're smarter than I gave you credit for.
Oh.
Well, man, this has been so much fun. And friends, thank you for joining us today as we got to reflect a little bit on life and ministry. I like what you started us today, Griffin. You know, sometimes we get God story envy when the story is big and dramatic and exciting, but sometimes it's just the little God nudges, the God winks that are the really big deals that we need to celebrate a little bit more. So until next time, I can't wait to hear what God is up to in your story.
Thanks for listening to Rough Drafts. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. While you are at it, help us spread the word by leaving a rating and review. Until next time, let's keep looking for how God writes His love into our stories.